This is so great. Well, thanks everyone for being here. We're pretty excited to share with you some of the things we're seeing happening out there in the innovation space, and to tell you a little bit about where innovation is popping up, because it's sometimes not in the typical boardrooms that you expect it to be. So welcome, and we'll get going right now. We hope to have time for questions at the end, so make sure you, if you've got them, that you jot them down and don't forget. Ready?
Go ahead, Dana. Yep.
Awesome.
So welcome, everybody, and just want to give you a brief overview of who the Canadian Food Innovation Network is. So we're a new not-for-profit organization who champions food innovation across the country. And we really do that by providing funding, collaboration, and connectivity. So we are fairly new, but we do have over 1,100 members now. And our funding innovation priorities are in these three areas: smart product and process development, food ecosystem sustainability, and agile and safe supply chains. And today's topic around digitization is going to touch on all of these areas. There isn't really one unique specific spot. So we're really interested to dive into some of those topics today.
Yeah, so our first topic is all about robotics. So what you see here is the type of robotic system that can be integrated into an existing food service location, can be potentially adopted into a facility that's doing a lot of high, we've got some disco lights going. I hope that doesn't mean I dance, because you just don't want that. But anyhow, this type of robotics
Could do the robot, Dana, just in part of it. Yeah, there you go.
Can we roll the tape back and start? No. Anyways, long story short, I think this is what a lot of people think of when they think about robots, something replacing a human being. But there's a lot more happening out there in the robotic space than this kind of innovation. Some of it is autonomous standalone stuff, and then some of it is doing really just repetitive things that people would rather not do. So who's adopting in the robotic space? It depends on what country you're in. When it comes to labor shortages, countries like Germany, they are using robots to replace middle-aged workforce members who are exiting. They don't really have enough people moving up in their businesses. In North America, particularly in the US, it's much more often businesses who are trying to replace a younger workforce who is potentially going into more exciting types of work, or doesn't want to do the kind of work that was popular blue-collar type work in the past. So this is one vision of robotics. And then we have something like this, which is completely different.
Yeah, so here we see more of a standalone, all-in-one unit. And this is just one particular example from SJW Robotics, an interesting Canadian company. And this is just totally a different model. This is really about a one and done, or an all-in-one encompassing type of situation. And it's really trying to take on most of the human elements of that model. And we see different versions of this around the globe. And they're quite interesting in the sense of how they try and take on some of the challenges and issues. It's not just about labor, right? Oftentimes we see these robotics being tied in as a one-to-one with labor, but that's just simply not the entire picture. There's other elements here around food safety. There's other elements around data. There's other elements around understanding product quality, yield, throughput, as well as popularity and customer feedback. It's a very interesting space, and of course, not all of these solutions come with all of those parts built in. But we can see these taking on different roles that may not be typically seen. For me, I live in a very small rural town, less than 1,000 people. And I often wonder if something like this may have value in a small area where it's tough to see different types of cuisine, perhaps, or different types of service models. However, it can also work, obviously, in a city, or even in the base of, say, like a large condo or something like that, where the population is immediately right there. So again, this is another interesting element around robotics that we're starting to see, as well as automation. And Dana's going to talk a little bit about what's the difference between robotics and automation.
Yeah, and before we get to that, I'll just point out that we often think labor, and a lot of people who are concerned about people having jobs say, oh, well, I don't want a robot replacing me. But the fact of the matter is a lot of the advantages that we're hearing companies reap, there is the labor issue, but it's also an amazing energy savings because, needless to say, temperature controls and lighting controls for automated systems don't need the same kind of creature comforts that obviously, a room like this with all of us in it breathing together needs to have. So there's this energy component. There, of course, is the consistency and that amazing dependability of a machine. Now, if the internet goes down or the power grid goes down, you can't just turn on your gas burner and keep stir frying. But it is an interesting, much more complex topic than I think I certainly had thought about before I joined CFIN last August.
You know what might be interesting, Dana? Let's just ask. Has anybody in the audience eaten food from a robot kiosk or anything like that?
What did you have?
I've had pizzas.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I've had pizza.
But they don't slice it. So you just get this big pizza.
Yeah. What are you supposed to do with it?
It's very difficult. So needless to say, it's not quite there yet. And that's such an interesting insight because, of course, the cutting of the pizza is the most difficult part for that machine to do with repetition and to keep it clean and to, deliver you the item without it falling on the ground. So, yeah, it's incremental, isn't it, the success? Thanks for sharing that. So automation and robotics. Sometimes when I'm talking to people in capacity of being a CFIN employee, they tell me, oh, we really want to invest in robotics. And what I actually hear when they tell me their plans is automation. So robots work next to people or replace people. They have a physical job. But automation is really an interesting space right now, too. We have a member who I won't mention because it's a confidential project, but they're working on, for instance, taking your typical burger grill and putting sensors on it so that not only, so when, I don't know how many of you know this, but I'm trained as a chef. And I was, when I was like bottom of the rung, I was first to arrive, last to leave. My job first thing in the morning was turn on the hood fan and turn on the grill. My job last thing was turn off the hood fan, turn off the grill. So we had the grill going at full speed all day long. With these new sensors, you have this amazing agility. If there's food on the grill will sense it and adjust its temperature accordingly. Also, it'll probe the burger or whatever you happen to be cooking and make sure you hit that perfect food safety temperature. So there's a lot of really interesting automations out there. They often work really well with robotics, but they are just a little different. So when you're having these conversations, I hope that little bit of, sort of differentiation in the wording will help you.
And Dana, I'd just like to build one thing on that, which I think is pretty interesting, is that's taken from a food service point of view, and you can very clearly see what kind of opportunities there are within that. But what about from a product developer who's manufacturing a product that goes to the end food service? Now you've got a different set of hands on the other side, right? You might have to develop a product that fits a robot. You can maybe now develop products that have different cooking instructions that are more dynamic than they were in the past, because through some of my history, I've run into issues where you can't change cooking protocols because there isn't a trust within the SOPs that the staff behind the counter will push the right button on a fryer, for instance. Now you don't have to necessarily worry about that, and you could develop products that could reduce the number of cooking cycles, or it could heat up quicker based on size and shape. What's also very interesting, and we don't get into this too much in here, but is the wealth of data that now becomes available that was never there in the past. If you think about a fleet of people working in the back of a kitchen, they're not going to be writing down data and saying, well, we had 2/3 of our burger patties were missized, the tomatoes were cut too thick, or they were going bad too quickly, or the color was off. Now you can start to get some of that data and feedback. What'll be really interesting is who owns that data and how it's utilized to make that continuum between, say, providing to a food service from a product development point of view, really right even back down into the field. If you take a tomato example, you may need to be growing tomatoes very specifically with their ability to meet a size profile for a robot. So just some things to consider in this space, right?
Yeah, all big things. And this is such a big topic that we've actually decided to dig into it. So May 12th, please join us. We have a robotics expert, Jim Beretta, who is going to take you on a tour of, I think, 5 or 6 different places in Canada that are using robotics at various points along the supply chain and the consumer market continuum, and it's going to be fantastic. This is free if you're a CFIN member, and later on we'll tell you a little bit about how to become a member, and hopefully we'll see you there, because there's a ton going on in this space, and if this little chat interested you, you should join us. So, again, I have an English degree, by the way, so I like people use the right words for the right thing. So I'm going to dig in here because, again, the same way I have been learning a lot myself since I joined CFIN about all of this technical hotbed of innovation going on in the food business, I've also had to really dig into words that I thought I knew. So, for instance, I put out a tweet a few months ago where I said, I'm looking for Canada's, best AI and machine learning thinkers. And I got blasted back from people who really know the space, and you're nodding again, that no, Dana, those are 2 different kinds of people. So Joe and I are going to take a little romp. You're going to see slides with a lot of text. Those are, we're not going to read them all, but they will be available on our website in the future. But we're just going to try and make sure that we're all using the same words for the same things, because I think that helps people to collaborate an awful lot better when we're, 1, speaking the same technical language, and 2, really understanding one another's needs. So AI, we hear artificial intelligence, like, I don't even know how many times a day. But what is it exactly? What it really is a way for a machine to mimic a human cognitive process, and that can lead to doing a lot of things that we dream about and fear, like the singularity, which is the day when robots and people are able to do exactly the same things. But it also has a lot of really great business applications.
Yeah, I think from my experience in the past coming out of food manufacturing, you see tons of opportunities on the food manufacturing side for bringing artificial intelligence and AI into the process. And usually that's an improvement against a pretty static or linear type equation that might be in some of your sensors or detectors, things like length and sizers, or identifying which perhaps cutter or oven that a product should go to based on its size, things like that. So AI is a very interesting one. One sort of blanket word of caution is that this word is utilized a lot out there, and that's okay. I just say don't get too hung up on the marketing of the word AI. An AI use case is not necessarily better than a simple algorithm, and I say simple because the algorithms can be quite complex. So don't get too hung up on that. Just get more hung up on, is it doing the job that I need it to do, and is it future-proofed? I think those are the questions you need to dive into when you're having these conversations with the folks that are helping you out in this space.
So, not to put you on the spot, because we didn't rehearse this, but when you say future-proof, could you explain that a bit? Because I'm not sure I 100% follow you.
I think sometimes, perfect, because this is a great example, and I've seen this a number of times, actually, is somebody's coming in with an AI or a machine learning opportunity, and it's fantastic. And to try and put it in context, let's take an example of analytics of food. Let's call it a device, and we'll see some of these later in the examples, that can do multiple measures, okay, and relate those measures to elements of that food. In simplistic terms, color, fat, size, protein, those types of things. But it can also measure other signals that relate to product characteristics that we may not have human words for, but they matter. And what I've seen is some of these organizations come in with this fantastic type of technology. They're trying to work with a partner, and it's above their head, and they can't quite understand it.
Gotcha.
And so what they want to do is they'll take this Ferrari of a device, and they'll ask the supplier or the partner to come in and dumb it down and drive it in first gear. And inevitably what happens, that means, so they're going to take this fantastic device, and they're going to match moisture measurement. So they already have a $5,000 moisture measurement unit beside that requires 20 minutes every time coming off the line, a human to do it. Then they're going to take this $70,000 device and they're going to take all those other measures, throw them out because they don't know what it means to them, and turn it into a $70,000 moisture measurement device, and the cost benefit isn't there. And so it gets tossed out. Your moisture measure is not future-proofed. It's just running a straight linear equation, most likely. It might be curved. And then you run over to this other one that maybe has multiple sensors, and now you can future-proof. You might be able to ask questions, and going back to the robotic situation, it might be able to tell you, are those the right tomatoes for the cobot at the pizza place? But your moisture measurement's not going to do it. So I hope that kind of paints a picture of where people can get stuck spinning their wheels. And I always think it's important to just try and understand the grand scheme of what you're doing with the device and try not to force it back into what we have as classic measurements that just have existed for many years because it was difficult to make measures, or often proxy measures for what we really want to know.
So to sum that up, what I just heard you say is that if you're going to invest in a sophisticated AI system, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons and that you fully, take advantage of all it has to offer.
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you. That was super helpful. Machine learning then is, the other thing that, as I mentioned, goes hand in hand. And as it turns out, machine learning is actually just a element of artificial intelligence. And it is what takes the information and does the actual learning. So I told you that AI was mimicking, cognitive systems, et cetera. This is how it actually learns and progresses. And this is what creates these very sophisticated algorithms that we keep hearing about, on mom chat groups. The algorithms making my children, into morons or whatever. That's the way we use the terminology. But as Joe mentioned, there are very simple algorithms that somebody who knows how to code and use back-end technology can do. But then these machine learning algorithms are the ones that do things that humans would struggle to do on their own. Do you want to add anything there?
I think this is a fantastic arena. It's a great frontier for food, and really it's a space that we need to look at adopting and not be too scared by it. Because that continuous learning element is going to be a big player. Again, if I think about food production around getting to that Industry 4.0 and having interconnectivity and understanding between different systems, to me, it's really where we can start to take some of those things that were always considered art. If anybody's from food manufacturing, that particular shift can do something different than the other particular shift, and there seems to be an art form around it that they seem to know. This is going to start bringing the data, it's going to start learning, it's going to start understanding, and you're going to be able to start dialing in the systems the right way. And I think you're going to see similar ideas to that all through the food value chain. So yeah, machine learning is a very interesting place. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get into all the details of the different neural networks and all those kinds of things. It's not our expertise. They're certainly out there, but encourage you just to get a little bit below the surface to understand what it is, and then try and find open ways to embrace it in small chunks.
Yeah, this is a topic that could be a whole conference, right? How machine learning is used in operations, how it can be used by management to do forecasting, how it can be used by the marketing team. So it's a huge topic. Blockchain, you probably are pretty familiar with blockchain at this point. It's a verified ledger system. Bitcoin, of course, is famous for being built on a blockchain type system. For the food business, the really exciting uses for blockchain are around transparency and food safety. Companies that use blockchain in experiments that or pilots that I've seen and that you probably are familiar with as well, they are able to reduce turnaround time during a food safety crisis where a recall has to happen by, what used to take days takes hours. They can isolate right to the batch what needs to be done. Blockchain's also being used on, as to use Joe's metaphor of the Ferrari driving in first gear, in a lot of other ways as well, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But blockchain really does underpin a lot of interesting things that are possible in the food safety world in particular, and when it comes to food fraud, if you sell something of very high value like olive oil, certainly that's a place where there is a lot of knockoff and fraudulent activity, and blockchain can help to give the consumer and the person who produces it the confidence that their product's getting to market in the right way and that the right people are able to purchase it.
I think you got that one, Dana. I mean,
I got that one?
yeah, the best use case
Check
really
mark.
is that traceability, and again, I think it's exciting for the food industry, and it helps take out some of those uncertainties or fear perhaps from consumer base. They're able to actually trace that food all the way through. So that I think is great. It should speed up things like export, import as well. Of course, the challenge is going to be around some of the standardization of that, but it is fantastic. Blockchain, that ability to have a clear view of what's going on across that food chain from the ground all the way to the consumer.
Of course, the challenge for things like blockchain, of course, is that you have to be able to crunch a lot of data. You have to have access to electricity and a really high-speed internet connection. So, this whole talk about 5G has gotten very complicated because of people who have conspiracy theories and that kind of thing. But the fact of the matter is the infrastructure is growing in Canada and around the world. But until we have it reliable and accessible to all folks along that food supply chain, this verified ledger system will struggle because there'll be gaps in it where people aren't able to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably just a technological roadblock, but absolutely needed to move forward on many of these technologies. You think about the Industry 4.0, you think about digitization within the agricultural communities. Those aren't in the middle of a city. They're often in rural scenarios. Canada's a large country. There's an infrastructure gap. I mentioned I'm in a small town. I don't have access to 5G. When I come to the city, I do, right? It doesn't affect me on my day-to-day life. That's just slower YouTube videos. That's not a big deal. But it matters if you've got terabytes of data being handled by machines talking to machines, trying to get just-in-time production schedules out the door to match other information flowing into the organization. So absolutely needed, and it'll be a welcome adoption. And it's going to be needed if you want to digitize the production, for sure.
So there'll be no test at the end, by the way, but thank you for your attention through that. I hope that was a useful few minutes for you, because it sets up, I think, a lot of future conversations really well. So now we're going to move into some examples of how companies, many of them Canadian, are using some of these technologies, some who are inspired by them, but doing some workarounds, and hopefully that'll make it all very real. So over to you.
Fair enough. So Sabermetrics is an interesting Canadian company. We kind of alluded to this earlier. They're really in the business of providing solutions that are sensor agnostic. They take signal from different types of sensors, think infrared, hyperspectral, acoustics, and they can combine them in different manners, both in real time or online, or offline, I should say, to do very complex machine learning predictions of what's going on, whether that's product quality, whether that's processing parameters. Interestingly, they've even done devices where they can detect gases in the back of trucks and help determine which retailer those should go to so they're moved before they spoil the fastest. And as you can see, there's all kinds of very interesting data connectivities there, right? The data needs to know what's going on in that truck, but it also needs to know what's going on in the supply chain and make those connections. So it's very interesting, and there can be many, many use cases for something like this. It could be productivity, it could be environmental or reducing waste, or it could be quality improvements. So there's lots of ways to use this. And again, it's one of those interesting ones where you can see challenges where it's tough to see that future path, the one that you don't know quite how to do, for somebody that wants to adopt it, and it can get pigeonholed into replicating what you're already doing, right? So it's very interesting when you see these types of technologies, and there's many other groups similar to Sabermetrics that do this type of technology. So just a very interesting arena and a great organization to highlight this type of effort that's out there.
One of the things that I found most interesting when I started to learn more about companies like Sabermetrics, and there's Kraken Foods and P&P Optica,
yeah.
two other really great Canadian companies who have similar technology, is how different innovators take that capacity and channel it. So what's really interesting about Sabermetrics to me is that it's so modular, it's lightweight, it goes with someone. It's not just in a lab or just on a production line. And I think that's exciting because it makes it a little bit more experimental. Like you can start to say, oh, well, I've got this thing. I wonder if it would do this or would do that. Whereas when it's built into an actual production line, I think it's less likely to have just individual innovators find a new way to use it. So probably enough said on that one. So the next couple of slides are two companies who are doing, trying to tackle the same challenges, but in slightly, slightly less, I guess, technical ways. These are innovators who are looking around them and saying, how can I do something different with the tools I already have? And although we don't usually fund that kind of thing at CFIN, we really admire that spirit. And this London company, Cullens, is a great example. They took just a way to, capture their batch codes and to manage, the beans and pulses that they buy from local farmers and make sure that they, kept them segregated just by using, I think, barcodes and that kind of thing, and paired it up with an app. And all you do is in the store or at home, whoops, I thought I was stepping off the stage there for a second. You just put this code into the app and it'll bring up a picture of this is one of their real farmers, and you'll find out what kind of soil they have and what other things they grow and when they became an organic field. And so you get this amazing storytelling opportunity. And it also, to me, I used to work at the University of Guelph where we were always talking about how there was this divide between, urban citizens and farmers. And then I moved out to the country and I discovered that no, it wasn't just urban citizens and farmers. It's just people who aren't farmers and farmers, that you just don't know each other. You don't know what your lives are like. You don't know what problems they have. And that disconnect is sometimes, sometimes problematic. And this is such a great idea because all of a sudden you can get this amazing transparency and really enrich your local food experience. Another example, and I apologize that picture is not fantastic, is this this project that HP did with this company Digimarc, and they've created a way for you to not only scan and get a lot of information, but when we come back to that food fraud point, there is unperceptible to your eye, but when you use the right application on your phone, you can see like a watermark on the packaging, which lets you know it's authentic. So if you think about the hologram on our money or on your credit card, kind of a similar concept, which makes it very difficult for somebody to try and say that, oh yeah, here's a $2 version of this $20 product, and that's super interesting. Also lets you customize. So for instance, say this was your pasta product, and in Canada, you knew that people liked red sauce, and in another country that they liked cream-based sauces. You could customize the information so that the marketing was directed right at your consumer, and it could be much more granular than that. And again, it is a slightly new technology, but it's not that far away. It's not, you don't have to make a massive investment. It's much more reasonable for a smaller, medium-sized company. Shall I talk about online shopping?
Yes, go for it,
okay.
please.
So needless to say, during the pandemic, many people embraced the online shopping experience. These are some examples of things that we saw really explode. Of course, the idea of click and collect became very popular and is not going away anytime soon. I think beyond the safety and health aspects of going into the store, a lot of people now have their saved shopping lists, and it just works into their routine to cruise by a kiosk and pick their food up. So we were really curious about how all of that would change and maybe grow into the future. So we hosted an experience that Joe will tell you about that we hope you'll go online and check out when you have time.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. So Dana hosted a panel of different folks, you can see there. And it was really kind of a neat conversation to understand how some of those pathways are going. And our top 5 takeaways are there. And that first one, post-pandemic Canadians will continue to purchase food in a variety of ways. When we heard a little bit of that from Sylvain this morning, if you happen to be here as well, at the 8:30 chat, there's options, and there's going to have to be options. And of course, many of those options now are digital and online. And of course, you get into that different blend of direct-to-consumer versus from your typical or traditional points of purchase. So that's going to continue to move. Consumers don't want to pay extra for online ordering and delivery. And that's interesting considering we've got inflation, we've got fuel prices going up. So that's a very interesting takeaway, not really necessarily tied to the digital of today, but something that's interesting to understand. Of course, companies are investing in more creative and efficient e-commerce and delivery models. That is definitely digital. Almost table stakes nowadays, isn't it? And kind of a tricky landscape because we certainly see some organizations are knocking it out of the park with their digital, I'm going to say, experiences or transactions, and some just sort of dogging it, quite frankly. And it's probably going to hurt them in the long run. But it's certainly needed for many of these organizations. And whether you do it yourself, whether you partner, whether you sort of pony up to another type of group and do it that way, it's certainly something you need to do. And we're not sort of saying one's better than the other, but it is important. Companies can leverage technology to enhance the customer experience and connection. So we just saw some of that, like with Digimarc, for instance, and there's other ways to do that. And Dana's going to talk about a really interesting one here in a second, so I'm not even going to talk about it. I'll let her do it. And of course, new technology is making the delivery process safer, more efficient, and transparent. Again, there's things like blockchain, there's things like these codes we've seen, but we're even seeing, if you go back to the earlier slides, robotics, we're seeing that last mile now even being covered by robots. They're not even necessarily needing a driver. They're going out, and that can be also cold products, that can be frozen products even, which you kind of think are the ones that can't make it, but also hot ones as well. So there are new technologies coming up around getting it to the consumer. That's also very interesting. So some interesting takeaways there. It was a neat conversation. It was good to get different perspectives from restaurateurs, and Mathieu is one of our colleagues from Europe, so it gives a different point of view from a different global perspective.
Yeah, it was great. And it was interesting because afterwards we had good conversations. And that's what a CFIN experience is supposed to do. We call it an experience because hopefully afterwards you want to tell somebody about it and you want to do something with the information. And our colleague, our CTO at CFIN, Nestor Gomez, he just was shaking his head. We were on a Teams call, and he's like, none of those panelists got the cybersecurity threat that's out there. And I was like, well, what do you mean? They're working with Shopify and this and that, and these companies, Square, that have all this, the customer data is all protected. And he's like, yeah, that's the customer data. And truthfully, I didn't think as deeply about what Nestor said until this week with the Sunwing thing that's going on. Look at what not having control of your data, of your e-commerce has done to that company. They have to manually enter everyone's reservation right now. So long story short, there's still a lot of opportunity for advancement for the individual companies, because if your order system fails or your fulfillment system fails, or somewhere along that chain, it's your brand that is still on people's minds. They don't go, oh, Shopify let down Dana's company. No. They say Dana didn't get me my whatever. So really, really interesting space to watch. We will, tomorrow afternoon, I'm sitting down to talk about the bricks and mortar side of this topic, New Pathways to the Pantry, with a great panel. I've got Mary Delamonte and Peter Chapman, and I've got such a good panel. I'm trying now to remember who all I have. Long story short, this room or the one next door tomorrow afternoon, and we'll talk about what's happening in that retail and bricks and mortar space, as well as in food service companies who are kind of blending food service and retail in new and interesting ways. So, NFTs. Anyone here own an NFT? Okay,
Two. Yeah.
2 people. Did you buy it because it was art, or did you buy it for another reason? Nobody wants to tell me. Okay, that's all right. It's your top secret personal beeswax. I respect that. So what we're seeing with NFTs is a lot of conversation. And a lot of people are really confused by them. You see, many very smart and well-informed business people publicly say, I just don't even understand this. So I dug into the whole NFT and the food business and learned a lot of really interesting things. So an NFT uses that verified ledger, blockchain, to make something that has value. So the typical number of NFTs that it's recommended to make, like of say one thing, like say that little dumpling, would be no more than 10,000. And the idea is that by having this in your digital wallet, your e-wallet, where you would keep your Bitcoin, is that you have something that will appreciate in value, number one. Number two, that when it's sold, the creator will actually get some money. So if you've ever bought a painting from an artist and it's gone up in value, none of mine have, but I have bought some paintings from artists. But if I were to have this painting, say I bought a Picasso and I sold it, Picasso and his family would get nothing of the profits that I made. NFTs are a little different in that there is always a way to make more money from your creation. So what's interesting about them is that they're being marketed to food service and to food businesses as a way to create a loyalty card. That's great, but you can have a loyalty card already. You can have a VIP card. Think about American Express, front of the line. You get to buy concert tickets first. So you don't necessarily need an NFT for that. So it works in only very specialized types of groups. So Gary Vee, the very famous celebrity entrepreneur and spokespersonality, he and a group have created this restaurant that it only accepts NFTs. And so that's a way to kind of make a club. Only people with NFTs can come into that restaurant, and only NFTs are used as an exchange for the value. But if you don't have a business that is built on very exclusive access, it can actually go against you. So imagine you're a restaurant or a store that does special events, say you do classes, and people buy an NFT so that anytime they want, they can just walk in. Well, if you're a restaurant with limited seating, you actually have a problem when that happens, because all of a sudden you've got to kick out somebody who had a reservation, or you have to always have some reserved seats for those folks who may turn up with their NFT, and the model just doesn't work. Works really well in the club business if you want to let people, get in without a cover charge or not have to stand in line, that kind of thing. But really, that promise of the NFT isn't fantastic. But where it is really interesting is for brands. So if you've ever registered a trademark, which I've done a gazillion times, every time you get a good idea, you try to protect it before you, lose it. Well, the great thing about an NFT, it costs about $300 to mint an NFT. So if you do that, you instantly get, if you've done a logo, a picture, an ad, anything that you want to mint can go into your digital wallet, and that proves the day that you, as a creative person or a business person, owned the use of that data. So a lot of brands are starting to use the NFT process, most in conjunction with still trademarking. But if you end up in front of a lawyer who says, oh, so-and-so says that they've had this brand mark for this long, there's no contesting when you've got your NFTs. So that is a really great use of them in the food business. But a lot of the others are like what Joe was saying. It's like using a technology that is expensive and sophisticated for things that you could otherwise do. The only other example I've seen in the food business are people using NFTs for crowdfunding. So the idea is, same way Kickstarter, you just give someone money in exchange for whatever your future reward is for supporting their idea. In this case, you buy their NFT. But it doesn't do it any better necessarily than Kickstarter. It may appeal to a different target market. So, if your target market is Gen Z, digitally sophisticated, maybe they don't go to Kickstarter. I don't know. But anyhow, that's what I learned about NFTs to bring that to you all today, because I was quite confused about it. Was there anything new that you guys learned from that? Was this or am I behind on the NFT? Non-fungible token. Yeah, but it's on the verified ledger. Cool. So last thing for me is to tell you a little bit about how NFTs and the metaverse are, again, this really interesting new opportunity. Again, if you're in Sylvan's talk this morning, he talked about how some of the bigger brands are starting to use the metaverse, Decentraland, as a place to sell people more of their food. And if you have thousands of outlets across the country, like say McDonald's has, great way to just keep your capacity up and to enhance your contribution margin. But this example is actually a very small diner called Famous Cosmos here in Montreal. In January, they spent $15,000 and bought a plot of land in Decentraland on the metaverse. And what's interesting is that they plan to partner with ghost kitchens across the country. So you'll be able to be in Hamilton, Kapuskasing, Red Deer, Alberta, be on the metaverse and see this sign and go in there and buy yourself something that a ghost kitchen will prepare and deliver to you while you stay online with your VR headset on. And two, you'll be able to buy some for your avatar and your avatar friends. So it's in a really interesting place where one trend, ghost kitchens, which of course use a lot of interesting technology and automation, and then this whole idea of metaverse come together. What's interesting to me is I feel like when I talk about the metaverse, it reminds me of when back in the 90s when I was starting to understand and use the internet. And I don't think we can really imagine exactly where this is going to go. I really think that if I'm fortunate enough to still be on the CL stage in 25 years, that when I say metaverse, it'll have a completely different context for all of us. Last little thing I wanted to show you is that, when we talk about NFTs and loyalty cards, this was a little mailer that David's Tea sent out a couple of weeks ago. Our director of programs, Alex, sent it to me because she's a David's Tea fan. And I love that they were using it for that loyalty card idea I was telling you about. But if you can see it, they basically say, even themselves, we don't really know why we're doing this, but here you go. And then they have their other tokens, which are their regular loyalty cards. So, people are out there experimenting, and good for them. They'll learn a lot. Speaking of data, if a lot of people start using the NFT that they're offering as opposed to the regular little loyalty icon. So, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think we're running close on time here, Dana, so we'll probably try to wrap it up here.
Excellent. Well, if you would like more of this kind of information, I hope that you will scan this QR code, become a CFIN member, come to our online experiences, and get to know us. We want to be a big part of your everyday business lives. So thank you so much for your attention. Do we have even a moment for a question? No, we went right to the time, didn't we? Well, Joe and I are around the show for the next couple of days.
Or we can go outside and answer any questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to be around, and we'll be hanging out there for a few minutes if you want to have more conversation. But thanks so much for joining us. Yeah.